The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transformed before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and do not be afraid. And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord. An inattentive, workaholic husband suddenly decided one day to surprise his wife with a night to remember. He went down to the department store and bought her the expensive dress that she had been admiring. He brought her a large bottle of imported perfume to go with it. He ordered tickets to the Broadway play that she had been wanting to see and made reservations at their favorite restaurant. On his way home, he stopped by the florist and bought 24 red roses, which he carried home under his arm. Upon arriving home, he exploded through the door, hugged his wife affectionately, and told her what he had done. I just want you to know, honey, that I love you, I appreciate you, I adore you. Well, instead of melting in the man's arms, his wife started screaming at the top of her voice. This has been the worst day of my life, she said. It was awful at the office. We lost our biggest account. Co-workers were obnoxious. Clients were unreasonable. I came home to find the kids had broken my favorite lamp. The babysitter is quitting and the water heater is out. And now, surprises of surprises, my normally sober husband comes home drunk. Sometimes people just don't give you a break, do they? This second Sunday of Lent, every year, we hear from one of the gospel accounts of the transfiguration of Jesus. There are 3. One in Mark chapter 9, one in Luke chapter 9, and then this year, since we're in the cycle of Matthew, we've just heard from Matthew chapter 17. What's interesting? John knows nothing of the transfiguration of Jesus. First of all, to appreciate the story and how it opens up, we got to go back 1 chapter to chapter 16, where Jesus asks Simon Peter rather abruptly one day along the road, Who do people say that I am? And you remember Peter's response. He says, You are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus affirms his answer. Now Simon Peter is going to get a bigger picture of what that title, Christ, means. We're told that Jesus takes 3 hand-picked disciples, Peter, James, and John, to the high mountain, says Matthew. Only Matthew will use the adjective high before the word mountain, unlike Luke and Mark, who just simply say a mountain. People have questioned for centuries why Peter, James, and John. We do not know. No clue. What we do know is that when you go further into Matthew's gospel, especially in chapter 26, when Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, he will take the same 3 apostles with him at that scene. But why? Once again, we do not know. He simply does. The high mountain is important for Matthew. Remember, he is a Jew who has converted to Christianity, and for the Jewish people, mountaintops were very key. It was where Moses communed with God and would be given the law. It's where Elijah the prophet would go to commune with God. It was the place where God revealed himself, the place of revelation. Well, once they're on top of this mountain, all of a sudden we're told two giants appear. Not necessarily because of their height, but because of what they symbolize. Moses and Elijah. Moses, if you remember in Exodus chapter 3, went to the mountaintop where he would receive the 10 Commandments. He is the sign or symbol of the law of the Israeli people, which is an important thing. And then Elijah in 1 Kings 19 would go to the mountain to speak with God. He was the great prophet of the Old Testament period. So he represents all of the prophets. So they're in conversation with Jesus is the point. What's interesting, when you go to Luke's account, we're told that they're talking about his exodus, his journey. But Matthew knows nothing about the conversation. He simply tells us they were talking. That's it. Well, while they're talking, while this is going on, we're told that Peter does what Peter tends to do. He trips over his words. He's like a little kid who just walked into a candy shop. He is so excited. So he says to Jesus, "This is so wonderful. Let me erect 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." Because you see, Peter wants to stay up there 50,000 feet. He likes the high of the mountain. But Jesus will not consent for him to do such. But no sooner than he gets those words out, we're told that a shadow comes over them all, and they hear a voice. It's the voice of God Almighty, and it is almost identical to the words that they heard in Matthew chapter 3, verse 17, right after Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist. The voice says, "This is my beloved Son, on whom my favor rests." But added are 3 words: listen to him. That will be the basic call of the true disciple, to listen to Jesus. End of Revelation, they come down the mountain. But while they do, all 3 gospel writers tell us, Jesus says to them, "Shh, say nothing to anyone." Why? We find this happening a lot in Mark's gospel, more than the other 2 gospels, Luke and Matthew. But the point, the bottom line is this. Matthew pictures Peter and the other disciples as getting a privileged glimpse of what Jesus is going to look like in his glorified state. That's what he will look like after Calvary. He will be radically transformed. He will be glorified. Metamorphose is the word that Matthew used to describe it. He's metamorphosized, changed totally in appearance, and they get to see it for the first time. But before we get there, Calvary has to happen first. First, Jesus must go on the cross. And so what the Lord does not want these disciples to do is to go off talking about the great times, the good times, until they've seen the cross, which is not pretty. What's the point of this passage for us? Did you enjoy the weather yesterday? Did you? Wasn't it wonderful? I felt so much, if I just had a tomato plant around me, I would have stuck it in the ground somewhere. I don't care where. It was beautiful. In fact, the 5:30 Mass yesterday evening was full of people, and it was interesting watching their attitude. They were bubbly. It was really funny. I told a couple boring jokes, and they even laughed at those. But I told them, probably this time next week, we may see some white stuff flying around in the sky. Yes, there's some Canadian air that's just waiting to come down from Canada. And it will probably intersect with the storm that's just left Japan moving this way. Most likely the snow will go north of us, but it's not without the realm of possibility that we won't see a few flurries. But guess what? It's not spring yet. But we got a wonderful glimpse of what it was like. There were people out washing their cars, cleaning their yards. It seemed like so many people were wearing shorts. They will not be wearing shorts this time next week, I promise you. But we got a feel for what it's going to be like. And you got to admit, spring is going to be wonderful this year. I can't wait. It's coming, but not yet. That's what happened to Peter, James, and John on that mountaintop, you see. They got to see the Jesus at Easter. They got to see what he's going to look like on the other side of Calvary. And it was glorious. It was glorious. Nothing they had ever seen before. But you know what? As glorious as it wasn't enough. Peter would go on to betray Jesus. We all know the story, the Last Supper scene in Matthew chapter 26. Jesus has just got through forecasting that his betrayer is at hand. And then Peter speaks up and says, I will never deny you, Lord. And Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, Peter, yes you are. Before this night's over, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. And Peter's saying, no, I will never deny you. Only to have him do such just a few hours later. And that's not all. Dear Peter, while Jesus was being beaten and whipped and stripped of his garments, Peter was at a very safe distance watching it all. He was a coward, too afraid to even defend his Lord and Master. And on the road to Calvary, where was Peter? I'll tell you where Peter was. He was hiding. He was hiding along with the other disciples, and as Jesus was taking his last breath after dying a torturous death, where was Peter? Hiding. He had run away like a coward. And then on Easter Sunday morning, when he runs into the risen Lord, he doesn't recognize him at first. It's not till Jesus calls out his name that Peter finally has his eyes open. And he's able to connect what he sees in front of him with what he saw on the mountaintop. And evidently, it not only wiped away all the sinfulness of Peter, his cowardice, his betrayal, his denial, but it would empower him to go on forward, as our Catholic tradition tells us, and literally lay down his life in Rome for the sake of the gospel. What an incredible turnaround. What an incredible change that took place in Peter. And that's what Lent is all about for us. Change. But you know, for the past several years, change is battered around, that word all around our country. It's taken on a cheap connotation almost. But that's not what it means for the true Christian. Change means a profound turnaround. In fact, the Greek word behind it, metanoia, means to turn your life totally inside out. That's what it's all about. But you know what? There's a problem. On a personal level, we fear change. I've been sharing with the people at all the masses this weekend that we fear change more than we fear death itself. We fear change more than we fear death itself. This became so clear to me a number of years ago when I was called out to give last rites to a 35-year-old man. He was the father of 4 little children and a truly loving wife. He was an alcoholic. He was lying in his hospital room, and I remember when I walked in the room, I couldn't believe that they had called me out to give last rites. I thought, this guy doesn't look sick. The man was dying because of acute alcoholism. In fact, his doctor had told him earlier in the morning before I got there that if he drank one more time, he was going to die. And so we had a long talk, and I gave him the sacrament for healing, and we prayed together. And I told him, I said, if you can't do it for yourself, you got to do it at least for your children. He was discharged 3 days later. He went home and drank, and he died. He died, leaving 4 children and a widow behind. You see, the problem is this. We often look at an alcoholic and we say, that stupid person, can't they see what they're doing to their family? Can't they see what they're doing to their lives? Why did he want to die? Why did he want to kill himself? Keep the bottle out of your daggone hand, pal. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But alcoholism is a disease that affects not only this, but also the heart, where we make decisions. And here's the problem. I know what life is like as a drunk. I know the high that I get that takes away that pressure at work or pressure in the house with the noisy kids or whatever's going on. I know when I look at my bills are stacking up. I know if I have a few drinks, all of a sudden the numbers don't look that bad for a little while. I know the next morning when I get up, my head's going to hurt too, but another drink will take care of that. And so I keep drinking because the thought of being without alcohol is difficult. You see, as a drunk, I'm the life of the party. I can rattle off jokes just like that, and all the other drunks in the room laugh at me. They love it. I'm entertaining to people, even though I'm an introvert, and I very seldom laugh. As a drunk, I can be a person who has all the answers to everything. Drunks are the most intelligent people on the planet. They know absolutely everything about everything. But you take away that liquor, I'm not quite that intelligent, you see. And the same thing with the white powder. That white powder makes me the most handsome man, the most beautiful girl in the world. Everybody's looking at me, I think. They're looking at me and thinking, wow, he's hot, she's hot. I'm the life of the party. I'm no longer intimidated being around people that I really don't know that well. And the thought of having to move those addictive substances out of my life is frightening. It's a tremendous pressure for people to keep on using, you see. And that's what I mean by we fear change more than we fear death itself. That 35-year-old salesman who was making 6 figures selling his goods in Pittsburgh chose to drink and die rather than to abstain and live for his children. And that's not all. My own personal reservations, my own personal fears, it's not enough. There's the peer pressure. Yeah, guess what? Peer pressure ain't a kid's thing anymore. And I hear it all the time. Peer pressure. As I shared with you a few weeks ago, weddings have gotten totally out of control. I'm working with a couple right now who just have ordered their pictures, and they're at the $30,000 level for preparing for their wedding. Why do people spend so much money for weddings? It's not because of commercials on television. It's because Mary and Sue and Kathy and Charlene told them, you can't do it that way. You have to do it the way Mary did at her wedding. And did you see Nancy's wedding pictures? Oh my gosh, they had such and such and such and such. It's interesting. Peer pressure, how it affects us. And we say, well, that's a kid thing. No, it's not. It's an adult thing as well. But here's how it works with regard to change. None of us wants to be perceived as different. We don't want to be different to others. And the last thing we want is for somebody who really knows us to say, what's with Rebecca? What's with her? I know who she is. I know what she did 30 years ago. What's this goody two-shoe stuff? What's that black stuff on her forehead? Ugh. And so they look at us, they laugh at us, they ridicule us, they gossip about us. And guess what? When we hear that, it hurts, and so we back off from change. I've had so many people tell me that how difficult it was after Easter, after they had this glorious experience of coming into the church. You go back to work that first day, and your peers wear you out. Who do you think you are, scuzzbag? I'd like to share with you a story. I dug this one up because I remember my mammy sharing it with me when I was a little boy. Once 5 fingers stood side by side on a hand. They were all friends. Where one went, the others went. They worked together. They played together. They ate and washed and wrote and did their chores together. One day the 5 fingers were resting on a table together when they spied a gold ring lying nearby. "What a shiny ring!" exclaimed the first finger. "It would look good on me," declared the second finger. "Let's take it," suggested the third finger. "Quick, while nobody's looking," whispered the fourth finger. They started to reach for the ring when the 5th finger, the one named Thumb, spoke up and said, "Wait, we shouldn't do that." "Why not?" demanded the other 4 fingers. "Because the ring does not belong to us," said the Thumb. "It's wrong to take something that doesn't belong to you." "But who's going to know?" asked the other fingers. "No one will see us. Come on." "No," said the Thumb. "That's stealing." Then the other 4 fingers began to laugh and make fun of the Thumb. "You're afraid," says the first finger. "What a goody-goody," sang the second finger. "You're just mad because the ring won't fit you," muttered the third finger. "You thought you were more fun than that," said the fourth finger. We thought you were our friend." But the Thumb shook its head. "I don't care what you say," it answered. "I will not steal." "Then you can't hang around us," shouted the other 4 fingers. "You can't be our friend." So they went off in a group by themselves and left the Thumb alone. At first, they thought Thumb would follow them and beg them to take it back. But Thumb knew they were wrong and stood fast. That is why today, the Thumb stands apart from the other 4 fingers. Lent is saying to each of us, do you want to be a finger or a thumb? If you're going to be a thumb, it's going to be lonely. There will be times when you will wonder if you're not nuts. The whole world is cynical. The whole world is sarcastic. The whole world lacks humility and is very selfish and self-centered. To be different means you will stand alone. But my brothers and sisters, one thumb, one good thumb, can make a huge difference in a community. So my prayer for all of us today is that you can be a thumb, a good thumb, a strong thumb. And may we thumbs continue to stick together as a community called the Catholic Church. And in doing so, may we continue to seek change in our lives. May we pray for others who are struggling with that change. And may we continue together to build the kingdom of God here in Cabell County.